Hello, beautiful people. I am back. Well, for those of you who didn't know, I had a technical glitch with my last video and I had to start again. So, good morning, magic makers. I'll start afresh. It's Bronley from chooselifehealing.com. In case you don't know me, you're maybe new to the group, maybe new to me. Welcome, welcome if you are. Hello, Pam. Everyone can hear me. Woo, woo. If you are joining me, pop a comment in and say hello. These brunches are intended to be interactive. It also helps when you can hear me for them to be interactive. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking some time to join me, whether it be your morning or evening. Like I said, interactive. You can ask any questions here. Hey, Diane, this is a completely closed, private space, very supportive space, no judgment. So if anything comes up for you whilst I'm talking, if something triggers for you, if you want to ask a question, by all means, feel free to do so. All right, let's do this thing. So where was I? I'll start from scratch. Collective trauma. Okay, so basically what I was talking about earlier when no one could hear me was the fact that we have been, as a collective, we've been exposed to trauma for a long time throughout our history. Okay, now what I was doing was sort of qualifying what trauma is first and foremost, right? Because we talk about trauma and the word's thrown around a lot, particularly these days. Thank goodness there's far more awareness coming out about the compounding effects of trauma and how it impacts people on various levels, which is amazing that we're having those conversations and that dialogue. But, you know, what is trauma? Well, a lot of people hear the word trauma and they immediately go to, you know, emergency services workers like fireys, ambos, police, you know, really attending very distressing events, witnessing very distressing events, you know, people passing and quite serious accidents in a lot of instances. So when we hear the word trauma, we tend to think of really extreme events, right? We tend to think of, you know, very, very extreme things that, you know, people are dying or there's a serious accident and they're, you know, someone's either involved in that or they're witnessing it. However, trauma is really a subjective experience. It's not, there's no one size fits all and there is no standard. It's really interesting because in things like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychological Illnesses and Mental Illnesses that they use to diagnose things like PTSD, all mental illness really. But, you know, even with PTSD, they try and define trauma, right? So they're like, oh, this is what trauma is. It's like there's one, hey, Catherine. So it's like there's this one definition of trauma and that's all it is. But I would argue that every person on this planet is pretty much has been impacted by trauma, whether that's directly through their own experience or indirectly through the inherited trauma that we are bringing with us generation by generation by generation. Now, what I was mentioning before is in the other video, sorry, I keep referring to the other video because I talked about so many interesting things. You're still having a few tech problems, Catherine. Just let me know if anyone's having any issues hearing sound, anything like that. Because I'll just be banging on otherwise and no one's hearing me. So the part of the problem is that we live in what is very much a fear-based paradigm. Okay, so we live in an information age. We are exposed to more information than we've ever been exposed to before. But that information is controlled by a few, right? It's not, we think the information that's disseminated is, you know, wide and diverse, and it is to a degree. Thankfully, we have lots of platforms like this where, you know, us normal folk can, quote unquote, you know, have a conversation and create dialogue, which is amazing. And I think that's why we're seeing such a shift in the collective consciousness right now. We're also seeing that shift because we've gone so far. I always talk about things as a continuum, right? So you've got sort of this continuum of energy and you've got these polar opposites and extremes on either end of the continuum, and then things are just moving along that continuum between those extremes. So if you want to think about it from the sense of a fear paradigm, right, what a lot of people are now trying to create is this paradigm of acceptance, of connection, because the fear paradigm at this end of the continuum that we have been largely entrenched in throughout our history. So this has been going on. If you think about, you know, when a lot of human conflict began, and it really began when we started to become more mobile, right, as humans, and we started to kind of encroach on one another's territories and things like this, and then people became territorial, and you know, it was very easy for people to be accepting and nurturing of their tribes because they knew one another and it was familiar and it was safe. But then when we started to introduce ourselves, we started to spread and introduce ourselves to these different places and people, this is when really, if we look at it from a very, very foundational level, which is where I look at everything from, because that's where you find where it all starts, right? And when you know where it all starts, then you can change things. So if we look at it from a foundational level, as soon as we started sort of introducing ourselves to different people and places and cultures, even in tribal times, there was some who was still doing the accepting, but there were obviously some of us who started to feel this sense of uncertainty, unsafety, and our place in the world. What is this and who are you? And so rather than the acceptance, just the blind acceptance that we had when we lived in our little bubbles and our little tribes, because we knew everyone, we were just continually born into this space and that we knew, and it was nice, but then we start to find others and we're not sure who they are, right? So this is kind of, I think, where it all set in, and we started to kind of question, and it became not about just anybody being human. It became about, you know, who is your tribe? Who are you? What does that mean? And what does that mean to me? You know, do I fit into that? Do I not fit into that? Is that safe for me? Is that not safe for me? And all of these sort of questions about what is safe for me and what is not safe for me started to veer away from simple things like, you know, is that animal over there going to try to eat me, right? Because I'm just a human in my tribe, to is that human over there going to hurt me? Okay, and so then we start to end up with this, what has become a compounding history of distrust and disconnect among humans as a collective, right? We've started to question everybody. You know, there's such a disconnect with people, and it's really interesting because, you know, we think things like the civil rights movement have, you know, made massive changes, and yes, they have made massive changes, absolutely. But if we're honest with ourselves and we really look at it in a raw way and in a vulnerable way, and I think that's what we need to do in order to address these things. We can't just gloss over it and go, oh, but it used to be worse, right? This is the thing, and this is the thing about trauma as well. We tend to, hi Robin, we tend to normalize things, right? So we go, oh, it used to be worse. You know, people had it far worse back in those days. You know, things have changed. And of course, yes, it did used to be pretty bad. You know, there was slavery. There was all sorts of things going on. Now, I say there was slavery and there was all sorts of things going on, but you know what? It's still happening. It's still happening. What has actually changed? All that has changed is it's moved more underground, but this is still happening, right? And it's happening to, just as it did, you know, in America and to, you know, all of those people who are enslaved. It is happening to people who do not have a voice and who are already marginalized and on the outer. It's just, and are not mainstream, right? They're not in mainstream awareness. So it's just like, well, that's okay. I mean, obviously it's not okay, but this stuff is still happening. So obviously, you know, the trauma that has been embedded in us, the stories of trauma that have been embedded in our collective throughout history are still playing out. Stories of racism, stories of slavery, stories of, you know, abuse, stories of mistreatment, stories of all sorts of things, you know, the horrible things that humans are capable of perpetuating on one another when they're in that constant state of fear and distrust and disconnect. It's really easy to, when you're not connected, to treat anything like it doesn't really matter, to just take life for granted, human life for granted. How much is human life taken for granted? And a lot of the collective trauma that we're experiencing is also happening at an institutional level. So it's happening in places that are earmarked in our society that are meant to be safe for us, right? Places like schools, religious institutions, right? Churches, places like government institutions. We've got, you know, here recently there was a big social security bungle, and computers generated letters and sent them out to thousands and thousands of people who are on welfare, telling people they owed the government thousands and thousands of dollars in debts, right? Sex trafficking, absolutely, Pam, absolutely. It's all still going on, right? It's all still going on. So, you know, and that happened here, and the effect of that, people were taking their lives because of a computer-generated letter that was a mistake, right? It was a mistake. And those people didn't actually owe the thousands of dollars. Some people were getting letters saying they owed $60,000 and you have to pay this debt back immediately or we'll cut you off your welfare. I mean, can you imagine for people who are already, this is people who are already disadvantaged. They're a part of the welfare system. They are already on the outskirts. They are already disenfranchised, marginalized. They feel completely disconnected, cut off, isolated. And then they get that letter. What do you think is going to happen? What is going to happen? And there has been no recourse about that whatsoever. So how do we value human life? Do we value life at all? When we're disconnected, it is so easy to just see life as like, whatever. It, you know, doesn't matter. It's just another one bites the dust. You know, we've become commodities in this day and age. Humans have become commodities, and very replaceable commodities at that. So, hey, Jeanette. So this is all the effects of this compounding collective trauma that we have been carrying with us throughout history, we've been experiencing throughout history, and we've been exposed to. And, you know, we can go down the rabbit hole, and we will, a little bit, of conspiracy theories. Why is it like this? It is much easier to control people when they are disconnected and in fear, okay? Like, there's a lot of people on this planet. And you know, I feel that the powers that be are concerned that if every individual on this planet managed to heal from their trauma and to step out of the paradigm of fear, then suddenly those people have true free will, right? Suddenly those people have true free will, and they have the capacity to think for themselves. And you know why? Because they're no longer in fear. When you're in a constant state of fear, do you know what? You're not thinking clearly. You're not, right? There's A, you're not thinking clearly, and B, when you're in a constant state of fear and trauma, you are running away from yourself. You are running away from yourself. You don't want to sit with yourself. Anything but I would rather do, be, touch, taste, anything but spend time with me. It makes you a really good consumer. Consumption is a fear-based response, right? Consumption in our world has become a fear-based response. That's why we talk about, you know, retail therapy. I mean, why is retail therapy a term in our world? What the hell? Retail therapy, right? It's like shopping has become a way to continue to be disconnected, to continue to look outside of ourselves to make ourselves feel better. So we are not going to turn inwards and start to explore what is really going on and reconnect with self. When we reconnect with self, we realize our power. And, you know, hey, conspiracy theory, but people in their power are people in their free creative will. And that means we are not the good little consumers, because we don't need to be. We are not, you know, all fighting one another. We are actually going, you know what, it's cool. You're over there creating your thing. You're over there creating your thing. I'm over here creating my thing. Wow, isn't this amazing? in that space, we have the capacity to create heaven on earth. But instead, we have created this hell for ourselves where we are all embedded in this fear paradigm and this collective trauma. And we're all so distrusting of one another and so disconnected from one another and from ourselves. Now, this seems like a big, big thing, right? It's huge. And you know, we talk about, I think I was talking about before, the continuum of where we're at. Okay, so when I talk about a fear paradigm, there's the opposite of that. Okay, there's the acceptance, there's the integrity, there's the truth, right? And I'm loath to just call it love. It's more than that, right? It's because we see love as something, we also have concepts about love in this world, and in this fear-based paradigm, love means something different to what it actually is, right? But, you know, that's part of it. And acceptance, connection, right? We need love in order to have acceptance and connection. Again, different kind of love that I talk about. I'm not talking about romantic love or any of that. So, you know, you've got this continuum, and at one end you've got fear, and at one end you've got this acceptance and, you know, love and creative flow and harmony and connection, right, down here. And we're moving constantly along this continuum. Everything exists on a continuum. It's all the same, right? It's all just energy on the same continuum. It's where we give our focus and attention. So when we're giving our focus and attention to the fear paradigm, then we are deeply entrenched and buried in it. And as a collective, we've been entrenched and buried in that fear paradigm for so long, and it has been nurtured for so long, and we have been exposed to it for so long. And so very cleverly, right? It's been the most cleverly crafted matrix and paradigm, I think, of our entire human history, this one in itself. But when we embed in that, then what we do is all of us are kind of, think of the continuum like a seesaw, right? You know, it's a seesaw effect, right? Tipping, we could talk about tipping point, and it's kind of, that's kind of what it is. It's like a seesaw effect. We're on the brink of a complete disintegration of what we've known and this matrix of fear, and entering into a new collective consciousness, right? The paradigm is shifting greatly at the moment, and the continuum is shifting greatly. So what's happening is when you're giving your focus and attention to the fear, right, when we're deeply entrenched in the fear, like when you're panicking about getting the coronavirus, when you're looking at the bushfires in Australia and going, oh my God, it's the end of the world as we know it, life is ending on this planet, oh my God, this is it, goodbye forever, humankind. When you're doing all of that stuff, you're actually focusing on the fear paradigm more and 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 more. And it's tipping further and further and further into that fear paradigm, right? So we're going further and further into that hole, into the whole of that energy. Does this make sense? If you're with me, let me know. So we can't change this for the entire collective. I can't change this for the entire collective. I wish I could, I would. You can't change this for the entire collective. None of us can change this for the entire collective, but we can change this paradigm and energetic continuum and shift this within ourselves. Does this make sense? So we can't change the entire fear paradigm for the collective, but we can change the fear paradigm for us, and we can step out of the fear paradigm. Like I was saying before, when you are in fear, you are not thinking clearly, right? Literally, our brain starts to shut down and doesn't work properly, right? And so the more and more and more we become embedded in this fear, the less and less and less we can think clearly, rationally, reasonably. This is why we accept things from our politicians and people that we should just not accept, right? I look around and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Why are we still voting for these people and paying taxes to them and giving them money to perpetuate crimes against humanity and against us, the people they're meant to be serving? I'm like, why is this going on? I don't understand, right? I can see through it all, and you know, a lot of people can see through it all, but a lot of people still want to, they get, you know, and this is, I used to do this, right? I used to get very angry about it and frustrated and, but this is all feeding the fear paradigm, right? The more angry and frustrated I got, the more I focused my attention on that fear paradigm. So I've stepped out of that now. I don't do that anymore. I know it doesn't work for me because I was deeply entrenched there, and I was entrenched in the collective trauma. I was simply, my internal state was simply reflecting a holographic reflection of the external collective trauma. So each one of us, imagine if each one of us went, okay, I'm going to change this paradigm for myself, and we stopped focusing on the fear. And we actually started focusing on what we can create. That's what I do now. I focus on what I'm creating, what I create, what I can create, what I choose to create. What is my vision? What do I want to create? And that becomes my focus. Everything, that is my focus, right? I want to create a better world for my children. Absolutely, I do. And for me, because I'm going to keep coming back here. That's my intention. I quite like it here. It's a nice place on which to create. We have the most beautiful heavenly space from which to create. So I intend to keep coming back for as long as I possibly can. And I really don't want to come back as a piece of bacteria sitting on a rock because we got it really wrong, right? I want us to realize individually and as a collective and start to have these conversations more and more and more as to where we've taken a wrong turn and ended up in this paradigm that we don't need to be in. So how do we heal from collective trauma? First, we heal from our own. And that was my big lesson. My big lesson, I was out there ranting and raving about it, and everybody's wrong, and everybody should listen to me, and I'll get on my soapbox, and I'll talk about how bad the world is. And I thought that was justified. I thought my anger, my righteous anger was justified. But what it was just a reflection of all of the unresolved trauma and anger within myself. Now that I'm not there, I see things very, very differently. I do things very, very differently. I behave very, very differently in this world. And I think very differently about all that is going on and all that I see around me and what I can and cannot control. And that makes a massive difference. So the way we heal the collective trauma, the way we are on the front line of that change, it's coming whether we want it or not, and we can be part of it, or it's going to get very uncomfortable, and it will get very uncomfortable regardless. But if we can be a part of that change, and if we can heal our trauma, then we can be on that leading edge front line of this change, and we can help this younger generation through coming through rewrite this story for humanity. Right, and change it. We've got to stop reliving the same history and start writing ourselves into a new story. This is the only way. And it starts with each one of us doing that for ourselves, each one of us doing that individually, you, me, all of us, right? Going, okay, what can I change? I can change me. I can step out of that fear paradigm myself and over here and find an equilibrium and a balance on that continuum. I'm not saying you're never ever going to again feel afraid or anything else. That's not it. And you know, it's a continuum. It's a sliding scale, right? And if you didn't feel some of that fear, you wouldn't want to create that change. Do you see? So there's an element of it that's necessary, right? There's an element of it that's necessary. So this isn't, I'm not encouraging you to bury your head and pretend nothing's going on. That's not it, right? And just, you know, be oblivious to all of that and live how you want to live and don't worry about any of that. I'm not saying that. We need to see and experience and feel that fear to some degree, all of us. If anyone tells you they have no fear whatsoever, totally BSing, right? We need to feel the opposite of the continuum so that we want to move further this way, right? This is what compels us as energy to move further this way. As energy, I don't like the feeling of this energy, so I'm compelled to move further this way toward this energy over here, right? So we need to experience and feel it. We just don't need to embed ourselves in it and give it all of our attention and all of our focus. So when we do so, like I said, we're not thinking clearly, we're not rational, and we can't make those rational, clear decisions about what we are creating and where we're going, and we can't maintain our focus on what it is that we want to create. This is where, you know, I think a lot of people are very aware of this now. We're becoming a lot more aware of this and talking about this more. It's just that people are feeling powerless, right? A lot of people feel powerless just because of that itself. A lot of people hear that and they're like, well, how can I change that? I feel powerless. I'm just one person. And I'm not saying to you you know, your power lies in changing the entire world. I'm saying to you, your power lies in changing you. And when you do that, you have more and more power. You take back more and more power from that fear paradigm that's sucking the power away from people. You actually take that back then. You go, you know what? I don't need to do that. I don't need to play there. I don't need to give my power to that. I see it. I recognize it. But I don't actually need to give my power to it. And I certainly don't need to feel powerless because I can't change it. I know I can't change it, but that doesn't make me feel powerless because I know that's not where my power lies. My power lies in what I can change and what I can create. That's where my power lies. So I'll connect with that. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to try and change the world, not by waving a magic wand or by deeply embedding myself in what I see to be wrong. It's not really wrong, it just is. But I decide not to play there because, again, that is where my power lies, in that choice. All right, take care, beautiful souls, and I will see you again very soon for another masterclass. Bye for now.